So we've talked about potting for growth, where we take a small plant, give it a bigger pot to make it grow. What if you've got a plant that's as big as you want it, and you don't want it to grow any bigger? You don't need to pot it on, you could just pot it for health. So it's a slightly different technique. Will it work? Well, yeah, if you think about it, Japanese bonsai can be 100 years old, and they're still in quite a small pot. So they need regular feeding and watering, root trimming, and some top dressing, all things that you can do yourself. It varies with the kind of plants. So if you had a house plant, and it was as big as you want it, and you don't want to put it in a bigger pot, you can't just control the growth. Sometimes by giving a house plant slightly root bound, it will flower better. Summer plants. You can keep summer plants at the end of the summer and reuse them the next year, something like this canna. So this has been this high in the last summer, dropped down for the winter. It will start up again, and it's quite happy to leave it in the same pot. And what about outside plants? So you've got your cordyline and you're happy with that pot, you don't want it to grow any bigger. They may be just the pot's too heavy to move, so you can't do anything with it. So you need to learn how to just pot for health. What does it mean? Well, we're trying to create more active root hairs in our plant. We're trying to make sure the root hairs can take up the fertilizer and keep the plant healthy. But we know that we can't pot the plant into a bigger pot and give it more compost. So we have to find another way of doing it. So, for example, this house plant, this Dracaena, we don't want it to be growing any bigger. It has got some roots sticking out the bottom, but they're water roots, so they're not the feeding roots. And then I think you can see that there are virtually no roots around the top here. And that's quite common in house plants, is what happens is as the water evaporates, it leaves behind on the top of the compost quite a lot of fertilizer salts. And sometimes you can see them as white deposits on top of your compost. And you'll find the roots will never grow in that area. And it's because it's too high in salts. So a quick and easy way of fixing your houseplants is to remove the loose compost from the top of your plant. So by removing some of the compost from the top of the pot, you can actually encourage some root hairs to come back into the fresh compost. Now we've taken the compost away that was too high in salt, so no roots could grow. We put in some fresh compost, and the roots can actively search out into that compost, pick up some fertilizer, and your plant will be healthy again. What about our permanent outdoor planters? So they're too heavy to lift. If you can actually get the plant out of the pot, if you can lift it out, you could trim around the edges, put some fresh compost in and drop them back in. What if my outdoor plant is so heavy and I can't get it out of the pot? Well, then you need to try and remove 2, maybe 3 inches of soil from the top using a trowel or a stick or even a knife to cut the compost loose. It will be full of roots, but you're not damaging the roots, you're just going to create new fresh root hairs. So by taking that top 2 or 3 inches off and then replacing with fresh compost, within 2 or 3 weeks you'll find roots coming up and growing into it. They're actively growing. So they're going to take up more fertilizer and they'll improve the health of your plant. So don't need to bother with top dressing. Why don't I just feed it all the time? Well, it'll work for a while, but then eventually your pot will become so full of root there is no room for new root hairs to develop. And when there are no new root hairs, it can't take up the fertilizer effectively. So by top dressing, we're removing some root, allowing some new root to develop, but the new root has got lots and lots of root hairs, so it takes up the fertilizer and it improves the health of the plant and the colour. So regular top dressing every year will improve the health of your permanent plants in your patio pots. The thing is, you only get one chance to feed them before the spring growth. If you miss it, it has less effect in the autumn or the summer. So the best time to go for it is March, April. If you do it regularly every year, you should be able to keep the colour in your permanent planters, but also they won't grow too big.